Hey, we would all like to be happy. Better to be happy than not. But what really is happiness? If we look to Tevye and Fiddler on the Roof, and of course he sings this famous song, If I Were a Rich Man. And to Tevye, happiness would be if he were rich. However, I think happiness is much, much more complicated than that. If we look at the World Happiness Report, which is put out annually by an arm of the United Nations, we see some interesting statistics. Well, what is this report? What is it based on? Individuals around the world in different countries are asked a very simple question. Imagine yourself standing on a ladder. It's called the Cantril Ladder. It has 10 rungs. And judge the quality of your life. If you think that you're very satisfied with your life, you're standing on the 10th rung. If you're very dissatisfied, you're on the first rung. And if you assign a value of 10 to the 10th rung and 0 to the first rung, then we can get an average of what people think. So this is the way that this organization judges whether or not people are happy in their life. Now, one would think that there would be a very close association with the gross domestic product. Now, the gross domestic product is actually a measure of how well people are doing. It takes into account several things. It takes into account how a country's businesses are doing, how much the government is spending. It takes into account the goods that people are able to buy, the services that they can afford, like health services, education, etc. And all of this is put together, and you get a measure. Now, interestingly enough, it turns out that the gross domestic product does not go step in step with people's happiness. Indeed, if you look at a country like Finland, which ranks right at the top of this listing, their gross domestic product has been stable, it has not been increasing. Well, look at other countries that, like the US and China and Japan and India, where people have been doing much, much better over the years, and the GDP has been increasing, and yet the level of satisfaction with their life has not changed. So there certainly are other factors involved. What seems to matter is not the absolute income that people earn, but rather relative income. What people really don't like is if they are making less than others are making. It is the inequality that rubs people the wrong way. And if you look at the Nordic countries, you don't have much of this inequality. You don't have the really extreme rich and the really extreme poor. Everyone is doing pretty well, and the social institutions function very well. And that seems to be a determining factor, is how much you rely on the state to take care of your education, take care of your health, etc. How much you trust these institutions to work for you in the long run. And in North America, we don't have the same kind of trust. So it's pretty interesting that it's the inequality that really makes people unhappy. Now, is there anything that you can do in your life to try to increase your happiness? Well, of course, there are things that you've heard a great deal about. Meditate, try things like yoga, and there's some merit in that. There's also something to the so-called gratitude journals. That is to keep a written record. Now, you don't want to do that too frequently because that itself becomes stressful, but you want to keep a record of the good things in your life, so that you're not always focusing on calamities. And that seems to work for people, to actually write down the things with which you are regularly blessed. Now, of course, we know that health is extremely important. You can't be happy if you don't have your health. So avoiding smoking, having a healthy diet, and regular exercise, those, of course, are conducive to having a happy life. But of course, not everything is within our control. For example, even if Tevye's wish for a small fortune had been granted, he still would not been protected from the pogroms in Russia at that time in late 1800s that forced Tevye out of the fictional village of Anatevka. Well, Anatevka was fictional, but unfortunately the pogroms were real. And that for today is our Cup of Joe.